You're listening to episode 56 of the Confident Writer podcast with Jane Pike. Hello, you amazing example of a human being. I am sitting here in my warm, cozy little den of an office looking at the raging weather outside. I had planned on writing today, and to be honest, it is so sodden that it didn't feel fair on either horse or human that I would be out there stripping them naked, riding them in the rain, and then putting their rugs back on while they were all soggy. So I've decided to call it a day before it even started and involve myself with inside activities in the hope that tomorrow is looking slightly better. Another really important piece of news before we get into the main discussion: I've started the ukulele. It's true. I just wanted you to hear it from me. I love it. I'm a total addict. It's day 7. I had my first official lesson last night. I've never played an instrument before apart from the recorder at school. Oh, I played the keyboard, but that was because I actually wanted to play the piano, but my parents didn't want to buy a piano. Do any of you have a similar story to this? So I have played the keyboard. One of my most painful childhood memories relates to a keyboard performance where I had to perform as part of the lessons. And I don't know why they do this, but it seems like every format around music lessons at school, at least, kind of pivoted on this idea that you had to perform in some way at the end of it. And I really didn't want to perform. I just wanted to play. But anyway, I had to perform at this festival. I was kind of mortified by the idea of that, but apparently it was a prerequisite. So I went in, and I think from memory, because I've blocked out as much of this event as possible, I played Imagine by John Lennon. Big ups to me, actually, for that song choice. And when I got up there on the stage, the keyboard had to be set up in a specific way. So we're talking about like the late 80s, early 90s here. So it's like doom chicka doom chicka doom chicka when you're programming the intro, and then there's various fairly nauseous worthy backgrounds that you program in. Anyway, so this is my memory. I'm taking you through it. Is this kind of like a friend describing their dreams to you? Anyway, we're in it now. Let's keep going. So I was up on the stage, and the keyboard up there was different to the one that I'd been practicing on. I'd never set that keyboard. And so there was a hall full of people. In my mind's eye, there was thousands of people, but there were actually hundreds of people in there. And I programmed my keyboard in the way that I knew how, only it didn't work. So there was those moments of silence while everyone's waiting for you to get started, and you can feel the searing hot pain of eyeballs in your back or in your side as the expectation builds for your performance. And in the end, I had to stand up and walk over to the edge of the stage, and my teacher was called Mrs. Bullock, and I had to go, "Is Mrs. Bullock in the audience?" And then she came up and helped me set my keyboard, and I was mortified. I cried all the way home. It's a lot to process. Anyway, the topic today is not musical instruments or my lack of talent around them. It is all about identity, actually, because there's been a lot of conversations around this in Joyride, but it's more amusing on my noticings, because when we talk about how it is we function on a systemic level, so when we're talking about the nervous system and the way that our nervous system behaves under threat, which is to move into fight or flight if that's available to us, or to freeze and shut down. When we talk about that and when we understand that, we have a context for our experience that allows us to recognize behaviors, ways of going about things that are familiar and that are, what's the word I'm looking for? That we all experience as a collective. That's part of our shared experience. Now, within that, there's obviously individual nuances depending on our background, depending on how our nervous system has been tuned growing up. So that has a lot to do with our carers and how tuned in and switched on they were or were able to be in raising us. And all of the myriad of experiences that have led us to the point that we are today. When we don't have that, when we don't have that context, and when all of our behaviors in relation to what it is that we've gone through or the way that we might habitually respond to situations don't have an underlying foundation of knowledge for us to reference them against, it's very easy to start to internalize our experience. And when we internalize an experience without context, then it becomes a personal problem, or it appears to be a personal problem. It appears to be a personal flaw, something that we actually have to fix about ourselves, or even worse still, seems to be unfixable. It's just a part of us. What I'm talking about here is taking on a behavior, taking on a mode of going about things, and thinking that is intrinsically a part of how we are, a part of our personality, if you like. And that is the difference between, if we take anxiety, for example, that is the difference between recognizing anxiety as an experience, between recognizing anxiety as a part of our flight channel activation and a way that our body seeks to mobilize and remove us from threat. And instead, we see the anxiety as part of us. We see that response, however dysregulated and discombobulated, as part of our personality. And this is the switch between I am someone that experiences anxiety or has experienced chronic anxiety even, to I am an anxious rider, or I am an anxious person, or I have social anxiety. Because the thing is, all of these experiences are dynamic, right? All of the ways that we respond to the world are dynamic experiences. And as soon as we ascribe them a fixedness, a sense of fixedness in our system and in our minds, then we have an issue, right? Because then it becomes a situation where we feel unhelpable, where we feel like there's something wrong with us. And that takes us into shame spirals. That takes us into situations where we feel less than or not good enough. All of those types of conversations, which are just so prevalent. One of the reasons that I bring this up is that I've recently reopened Joyride, my membership program, and we've had a flurry of amazing new members sign up, which has been so incredible. And off the back of that, I receive emails and people introduce themselves in the Facebook group describing what it is that they've been through. And the stories honestly blow me away. Like, just when you think you've heard it all, something else comes in and you think, wow, like, how does a person get through that? Or, wow, that's an incredible story or an incredible hardship. And the thread that is within each of those experiences, within each of those personal stories is, once they have an understanding of why it is we go to these places, why our body, why our brain chooses to go to these places, we have hope, right? We have hope. We have this weight lifted off our shoulders, which we've been holding and carrying and even gripping onto really tightly, that tells us that there's something wrong with us and that we are unhelpable. And even beyond that, if we really start to dig deeply into the aspects that cause us to feel really disconnected, that perhaps we don't even deserve the help. Not for everyone, but just we're talking about layers here. We're definitely talking about layers. So this concept of identity is a really fluid one, and what it is we identify with. And in order for us to really get a grasp and take back our own sense of identity, our own sense of power, to reclaim a sense of ourselves that allows us to operate in the world and ride with a sense of integrity and dignity, we need to have reverence and extend an extreme amount of kindness and compassion to ourselves about why it is we are in the position that we're in, if we deem that to be a position that we would like to move away from in some way. For example, a chronic state of worry or anxiety, a chronic state or feeling of disconnection, working with your horses and habitually going into a chain reaction that leaves you feeling immobilized or weepy and emotional. All of these things which they feel kind of out of whack with the essence of what it is we would like to be presenting, and yet we don't know what to do about it. So extending compassion to yourself, extending kindness to yourself is the first step, because we have to understand that every choice that our body has made up until the point that we're at now has been based on the resources that it has available to it in order to safely and efficiently navigate the circumstance it finds itself in at the time. And it has always been done with your best interest at heart. You're not at war with yourself. Your body has made a decision, your brain has made a decision based on the sensory information it has available to it, based on the resources that you have available to you, based on the stresses that exist in your environment to take you to a certain mode of operating. And when we don't have the skills to come back to a regulated place, to come back to center, to come back to balance, or when we haven't started in that place to begin with for a really long time, then we have to understand that that too was the best we could do. It was the best we could do. So this hope element, the candle gets lit when you realize that this is not a unique experience to you. You are unique, but the ways that we respond are part of a collective response, the response of our collective nervous system. And you can dive into it on a number of levels, but it's really important to understand this, because the other thing that happens, let's talk about or use anxiety as the main kind of reference point for this. So anxiety, the feeling of anxiety and the decision of your body to move you into a specific mode of being, be that to flee or be that to freeze up, is based on two different aspects of information. It's based on you looking around your environment and deciding, for whatever reason, that this is not a safe place for you to be in. And the level of response will be proportionate when we're balanced to the level of threat, meaning that I can get an inkling that kind of like, doesn't feel so good to me. And it doesn't mean that I'm imminently under threat, but my body has indicated that I need to move away from this experience in whatever way, in a timely manner. And that can range all the way through to full-blown panic, where your body is screaming at you that this is not a good situation for you to be in. So that's the first smoke alarm practice of anxiety, through examining our external environment. The other way that we can feel anxious is through an examination of our internal world. So if we're having a stress-related response that is as a consequence of something in the past, our body can respond disproportionately to our environment, and the alarm signal of anxiety gets activated through the way that our body feels. We're actually caught in this vicious cycle, if you like, of elevated heart rate, elevated respiratory rate, sensations and feelings that we attach a narrative around and inflate and exaggerate that kind of compounds on itself. And then we find ourselves having a completely disproportionate reaction to what it is that's presenting. Now, both of these we've probably experienced in some shape or form at some time, right? All of us, I believe, will have had some experience to that, and some of us will be experiencing this as part of our day-to-day lived reality. The danger, though, again, coming back to this idea or discussion around identity, the danger is that if we have experienced an ongoing relationship with anxiety that is based on our internal world, that is actually, for the most part, disproportionate to what it is we're experiencing on the outside, then we also get a little bit black and white about what that message means. Meaning that if I am then in a situation that is not good for me, for instance, if I am out-skilled by my horse in terms of like my horse is presenting me with something rather that is outside my capacity to deal with competently. And that's just a skill-based assessment. Now, if I was to feel anxious and I really took that on board, I can ignore the very real warning signals of my body that tell me when an environment isn't good for me. And we start to mistrust our own intuition. So after a while, any sense of anxiety we relate as some kind of defective emotion on our part, and we become numb to the idea that there could be relationships, horse or human, there could be situations, there could be circumstances that we're in, that our body has a very real understanding that isn't good for us. However, we've kind of clumped everything together and we're no longer able to separate out things on a sensation level and have a more nuanced understanding of what our emotions and sensations are trying to tell us. I hope this is making some kind of sense. It's very much a stream of consciousness. I never really plot anything out. So let's just recap a little bit and kind of tie that up in a slightly neater package. What I'm talking about is really making sure that you do not tie your identity to an emotional or feeling-based experience. When you do so, you become desensitized to real signals that your body is giving you in response to what it is that's going on. And you immediately presume that it's all on you, that the fault all lies with you, which is of course never the case. The other thing that taking on the identity of being an anxious rider or an anxious person does, and this can be, anxiety is just an example, right? You can literally insert anything in here, means that you disclude yourself from the ability to change that experience. You are clinging tightly to this identity and you really limit, it becomes a filter through which you observe and take in the world, and you limit the scope of what you accept that could potentially change that situation. What I would be interested in asking, just as a question around this as well, is if you do feel like you're attached to a specific way of going about things and have really strongly identified that with that for a while, I would ask you what you gain from holding tightly to that. How does it work for you? Because developing a comfort zone doesn't necessarily mean that that comfort zone is what we want or is particularly comfortable. It just means it's what we know. And so any range outside of that takes us outside our normal modus operandi and can feel very unsafe. A movement towards a more integrated and better way of being, and better is not the right word, but kind of a more sustainable, I guess, way of being and showing up in the world and showing up for our horses can feel scary if the place you're used to living in is one that feels very highly stimulated or very highly activated, as in the case of anxiety. So what do you gain from it? Is there a gain to staying in the place that you are? And then also the other thing I would ask is, who benefits from you having that identity? Does someone or something around you benefit from staying in that place? This is a good question to examine in regards to friendship groups, in regards to relationships, in regards to horses. Like if you're anxious and you're holding on to that anxiety as part of your identity, there's a huge amount of camaraderie that exists with other riders who feel a similar way. And the need for acceptance is huge, right? We always want to belong. That's like one of our fundamental human needs. And so it can feel threatening, life-threatening, to actually challenge that way of being and move outside of it into a different zone, simply because we're afraid if we're no longer presenting the way that we always have, that people perhaps won't like or accept us anymore. So that's just kind of a disclaimer of like, be careful what you might be holding on to unknowingly, purely for the sake of someone or something else that ultimately isn't really serving you. The next thing that I want to briefly talk about, and I've written a little bit about this, and I'm thinking about doing a bigger session on it together, is uncoupling. Uncoupling activation with the feeling like you're actually physically under threat. So when we have a very narrow window of tolerance, when we have a narrow window for the amount of energy, activation, and experience that our body can handle, what happens is that when we experience any level of activation coming in, we immediately default to a survival response, be that fight, flight, or freeze, or collapse. And that is because many of us have got ourselves into a situation where discomfort of any sort is equal in our feeling to us being under physical threat. So let me use a non-horsey example for a minute. Let's say I'm having a conversation on Facebook and someone criticizes me, and they're not very nice in the way that they do it. Let's say they were personal and kind of being a bit arsey. And my response was to immediately get a hot sweat, to feel incredibly anxious, and to almost feel like the world is closing in on me. Now, what has happened there is that I've coupled together discomfort, the discomfort of the feeling of being criticized, with a physical response that my actual survival or my physical safety is under threat. But those two aren't the same things. They're very different things. If I was to push myself back from my computer and look around the room at that moment, I would see that I am actually very safe. There is no reason for me to be responding that strongly to what it is that is going on. And if I'm able to increase my capacity for that, I begin to uncouple this idea that discomfort is threatening to my physical safety. So we see this happening in riding situations all of the time where we are actually safe. The situation that we find ourselves in is actually safe, but our horse might just be showing a natural level of power, right? And all of a sudden we feel almost panicky because that level of power mirrored in our bodies feels like we might die if I'm really going to take it to the extreme. And so we panic. But essentially, there's nothing that on a competency level we can't handle. Our horse is just experiencing and expressing the normal amount of power and forward that, just shows him up as an alive horse in the arena. And yet many of us are almost requiring our horses to flatline in order for us to feel safe. So this uncoupling process is so important, because without it, we don't allow ourselves on a systemic level to feel any sort of discomfort. We actually can't hold any sort of discomfort. And you can see the ramifications of that on a personal level. You can see the ramifications of that in the arena or out on the trail with your horse. You only have to look around now to see the ramifications of that on a community and global level, where discomfort causes people to really respond in very highly activated ways, into rage, into panic, into complete collapse. So the work of increasing our capacity is so far-reaching. It's not only part of the process of healing our own individual circumstances. It's not only a matter of really being able to have this beautiful connected partnership with our horses, but on a much broader level, on a collective nervous system level, that work is necessary as well for us to be able to have hard conversations and to be able to take things in a direction that benefits everyone. So really start to notice, just become curious about yourself. Become curious about how much you internalize stuff going on. Have you been trained into helplessness? Do you lose your power of agency under stress? Can you still mobilize your body? Can you mobilize your voice or not? And at what point do you feel like you lose the capacity to do that? So it's without judgment. It's just becoming curious about where it is you sit now on that scale. And does energy in your system take you to a place of feeling like you're physically under threat? Have a little play with it. It's interesting because we're really wanting to sort of resensitize ourselves, if that feels safe for you to do so, of course. All of these are invitations that you can completely reject should you wish to. But if you're in a space of feeling like that would be a cool thing for you to do, have a play with it. Just get out there and notice how you feel in your body. Notice how it feels in different conversations. Notice what you feel like is available to you. Like if I'm talking, do you reject it? Do you embrace it? Do you have a discomfort that comes up, and how easily can you sit with that? Really important conversations. All right, team, thanks for tuning in. It's always fun to hang out. As per, if you want to get in touch, you can find me on my website, confidentrider.online. And if you want to come and joyride with me, I would love that too. confidentrider.online/joyride. I'll catch you on the flip side.